Mike Barlow sat across from his wife, Gina. She was twirling a glass of white wine on the table. She had asked Mike for a discussion. She had said, "Mike, we should have a discussion of what we're going to do, going forward." She was a lawyer, so she didn't just say, "We need to talk." But Mike got the message, and he knew, more or less, what she was going to say. He asked, "So?" Gina said, "Mike, we're coming up on our 25th anniversary. I feel like things have gotten stale for us. We need to inject some excitement into our lives. Now the kids are gone to school." Mike's face was impassive, even stony. He said, "And?" Gina was taken aback a bit by Mike's stoic response. She began to feel defensive. She said, "I want you to know that I love you very much." Mike nodded. He spoke not a word. His face betrayed absolutely no emotion. Gina was further unnerved by that. She said plaintively, "Aren't you going to say you love me?" Mike gave a slight negative shake of his head. That was it. He was determined to make this as difficult as possible for his wife. In that, he was succeeding. Gina had a sinking feeling about this entire undertaking, somewhat like the feeling as a jury returned with what she knew would likely be a bad verdict. Mike was the jury. She wanted something from him, but it was clear to her that he was in no mood for acquiescence. She began to become angry. She blurted out, "I have a date Friday night. I want an open marriage." She thought to herself, "There, I've said it." Mike gave a kind of diffident nod, followed by a very small movement of his shoulders that could have been interpreted as a shrug. Or not. He said nothing, and his face was as stony as that of the proverbial sphinx. He stared at her, waiting. Gina spat out her next revelation. "I'm going to spend time with him, and I'll be back Saturday." As she said this, she stood and loomed over him. He moved his head just enough that he could see her face. He also put both hands flat on the table, to be ready in case she tried a physical attack. She didn't. Instead, she turned and flounced out of the dining room and up the stairs. Their bedroom door slammed. A small smile crossed Mike's face as he sat. He arose, cleared the dessert dishes and wine glasses, and took them all out to the dishwasher. He started the machine. Then he pulled out a cheap cell phone and texted one word. 6. Gina threw herself onto the queen bed. She was quivering. She had never expected the reaction she got from Mike, a total lack of reaction. She was stunned and fearful. She had believed that she could bring Mike around, an open marriage. He could spend time with his secretary, if he wasn't doing that already, and she could spend time with Bradley Dubois, a younger lawyer at her firm. If his reaction was too extreme, she could cancel until she brought him around. But now, she was lost. She and Brad intended to go out to dinner, then some dancing at a hotel bar, then upstairs. They'd be home to their families the next afternoon, after checkout. They had a reservation at a downtown hotel, far enough away that people from their area wouldn't know. Brad was not going to tell his wife. He was 32 and had 2 young children. His wife, Blanche, thought he would be away on business. That was the plan. But now, she'd have to discuss this again with Bradley. The two of them had become close over a period of months while working on a case involving a massive tort claim. They'd had several lunches, each longer than the last. Discussing work. That was what they told the curious at the office. 2 weeks before, Brad had expressed his feelings for her, or maybe only his strong attraction to her. She was a woman who attracted that sort of attention. Tallish, at 5'8", with a slender figure and an attractive look to her round face. A natural blonde. She was fit from gym work and some running. Brad was also fit, 6'2", medium build with soulful brown eyes and longish light brown hair. He looked younger than he was, and when she was with him, Gina felt like she was also young again, not 47. She knew she didn't look her age, but when she was with Brad, she felt like she did when she was at college. It wasn't as if Mike was a bad husband. She loved him, and he satisfied her. He was fit and adept, athletic. At 5'10" and 165 pounds, he was only average size, but Gina knew that women often went after him. Still, they'd been together for over 25 years, exclusive, and married for over 24. She'd been feeling stale even before she was paired with Brad at work. All her life men had come after her, and she'd turned them away ever since she was with Mike. But not now. Not now. She needed a boost. She never thought that she'd leave Mike. She thought he'd agree, eventually. After some problems, maybe. She was determined not to deceive him about this. And she knew that he wanted his longtime secretary, Ellen Grove. She'd given him a hall pass, along with her own. And he never said anything. She had no idea what he was thinking. It was way more than unsettling. It was scary. She felt as if she may have blown up her life, and she didn't like that. Her life had been a very good one, and that was largely down to Mike. Mike had captivated her, in and out of bed, and he was still all she could have wished for, in a husband. Except, maybe he should be more understanding of what she knew to be a temporary midlife glitch. Despite her awareness of this as a midlife crisis that would pass, she wanted another man. She'd had many before Mike, and only Mike since they first met and fell into bed. Gina had very good reasons to be frightened, but she was not completely aware of those. Mike Barlow was the product of a poor area of the city, which featured immigrants from various parts of Europe. Mike's father, Bart, was an alcoholic, who held down a job as a janitor at the local high school. His mother worked at the cafeteria in the same school, where, eventually, Mike went for his diploma. Mike had an older brother, John, who had barely made it through school 4 years ahead of Mike. John enlisted in the Navy and got right out of the area. Mike was a very different matter. He was athletic and very smart. Also, the girls liked him. His teachers, who expected another John, instead got a boy who excelled at all academic endeavors. Mike never went out for school sports or other extra activities. He had to deliver papers, groceries, and other things to supplement the family income. He was a hard worker, and in school, he never got less than a top grade. That got him noticed. One part of being noticed was being resented. Mike was always on guard against the class bullies. He got his rear kicked several times. He could outrun any of them, but sometimes that wasn't good enough. He studied about the problem, reading books on fighting, called self-defense. Then he'd practice those things at home, out back where he had fashioned a large canvas bag to hang on a tree limb. He'd punch and kick the bag from when he was 10 years old. He got good at punching and kicking. One day, he didn't run from Jimmy Dugan, a major pain. Instead, he knocked Jimmy Dugan around an outdoor basketball court until Dugan's buddies pulled him away. That solved the bully problem. And it got him noticed even more by certain elements in the neighborhood. Paul Pilati and his wife Rita noticed, as did their partner Thomas Bogandic. When he was 14, Mike was invited to eat dinner at the Pilati home. They had older kids, who weren't there when Mike arrived. Thomas was there, though. Mike, of course, had heard around that these people were shady and not to be crossed. He was well-dressed and polite throughout the spaghetti dinner. He was nervous at first, but relaxed. Rita was a lively woman, very pretty, and Mike liked her. After a while, he was actually having a reasonable conversation with these adults, shady or not. They spoke about the area and the people they all knew. Also, about local politics and the union. He had a nice time, but only vaguely understood why he had been invited. 2 weeks later, Paul and Thomas walked up to him as he finished his grocery route. They moved him aside into a small park. Paul explained, "Michael, we have seen you do so well for yourself and your family. We like to help out people from our area who deserve a shot at something a little better. So, if you'd like, we can help you out." Mike was wary, as both men expected. How? And what would I do? Paul said, "We don't have anything you'd have to do. We want you to have more time to improve yourself. So, we could let you have the amount of money you make with the extra jobs, and you could have time for study." Tomas, who scared Mike a little with his size, smiled at Mike and said, "And maybe you'd have a little time for fun, girls, sports, whatever." Paul said, "We want you to be the best you can be, without joining the army. If you do well, you could get a neighborhood scholarship to a college." Mike said, "What's that?" "A scholarship. You could be one of the few from this area to get a degree." Mike thought it over for a few seconds. He never for a minute believed that he was being offered something for nothing. He said, "I won't, hurt anyone." Thomas laughed out loud. "Oh no, for sure. When you graduate, we may need your help from time to time, like if you're a lawyer or something, but never to get you into trouble. We look ahead, Michael. You just be yourself, and remember who helped you out." Paul said, "One thing, Michael. I understand that you have an interest in, like, the stock market and bonds and stuff." Yes, I have looked at that, when I have the time. So maybe spend a little more time on that, 'cause we could use some advice from time to time. Okay, deal. They shook on it. Mike really did have an intense interest in financial matters. He read up on it all the time, when he had the time. About 6 months later, Tomas and Rita came to Mike and asked him about a company on the stock market. Mike looked into it and told them to stay away. A week later, they asked about another company. He looked into that one and said to buy it. He was correct both times. All through his high school years, he would give such advice. The Pilates and Thomas made some profits, especially when Mike had them buy into a small computer programming firm. When he was a junior, Paul came to him and told him to apply to college at the University of Pennsylvania. He did, and he got in. Full ride. He was 18, and Tomas gave him a nice used Ford Mustang to get to Philly. Mike protested about the car. He thought it was too much. Thomas said, "Michael, you made us so much money. Don't worry about it. If you keep it up, I'll set you up with Doris." He laughed. Doris was his third wife, and she was very attractive. But her time with Thomas was about up. He had a pattern. Mike blushed. But 2 weeks later, Doris cornered him at the bar he hung out in sometimes and took him to the back. She said, "Thomas is okay with this, Mikey." And then she was with him in every way he could be. 4 hours later they emerged. He got a round of applause from the bar. That was at the start of the summer, and he and Doris kept at it until he went to school. Sometimes she brought her friend Ellen. Just another aspect of Mike's education. Mike did very well at Penn, and he met several very eligible women who were impressed with him in and out of bed. After all, he had a Mustang. He studied finance and economics. He kept on with the tips to his friends. He went back to the neighborhood in the first 2 summers, and on holidays. Spring break was for Florida, in the Mustang. When he returned home, he got lots of attention from local women. He took advantage of that. At school, he was a grind, and really didn't date. He had an apartment off campus. He could afford it because he was getting a certain percentage of profits derived from his tips. Not all the tips worked out, of course, but the clients were satisfied. He had more clients now, too. Word had spread. But apart from an older divorcee who lived on his floor, he stayed celibate on campus. The woman was Doris Mackay. She was very experienced and needed Mike. He was her relief pitcher, she said. She was a baseball fan. Mike met Gina at a party in his junior year. They were both 20, born in the same week, she 2 days behind him. It was rare for Mike even to be at the party, which was thrown by a fraternity that a buddy of his was in. Mike saw Gina across the room. She stood out to him. He had seen her before on campus, but had never spoken to her. Now, he was smitten, and being a guy who liked direct action, he walked directly to her. She saw him coming, as she knew he would. He put out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm just as in love with you as all these other guys." She smiled at him. She said, "Not more?" He laughed. "Now that you've spoken to me, yes, more." They danced and laughed with each other. Gina turned down several guys who asked her to dance. Women also asked Mike, but he declined. Gina was impressed with Mike. She was a woman who was known around campus as an easy lay, if not an outright home run. Mike was aware of that. So, at first he came to her for possible sex. But as they talked and danced, he changed his mind. Of course, he still wanted her in his bed, but he liked her a lot. She was very intelligent, quick-witted, and she could dance better than anyone Mike had gone out with. Mike was a good dancer, and appreciated a partner who could keep up with him. At 11, Mike and Gina left the party. They both wanted what they wanted, and ended up at his place, in his bed. They were as good a fit in bed as each had expected. Maybe better for Gina, since Mike, while obviously attractive, was not nearly as big a guy as she was used to dating. Not as big overall, and not as big downstairs. Average. Yet, she found that she was far from disappointed. Very far. He went down on her like an expert, and when he entered her, he was able to bring her off quickly, often, and with intensity. Something about his angle of approach, maybe, she thought, when she could think again. Soon enough, he was erect again, just lying next to her. So, she mounted him and was with him slowly. That was something they both loved. Neither of them had had much to drink, but they were each besotted anyway. Gina was surprised, even shocked, by her experience with Mike. She was admittedly a girl that got around the block, if you know what I mean. She was a rich girl from outside Philly, and she had vast experience with men and intimacy. Way more than most 20-year-old women. She simply loved men and the intimacy that went with them. Her mother was also that way. She thought it was maybe heredity. But Mike, this average-looking guy with a quick wit, was her best ever. Go figure. Mike was also astounded by Gina. He had heard rumors about her. Mike had had many women, including many very attractive ones, experienced and older than he. He'd learned a lot since Thomas gave him Doris. But Gina was his age and kept up with him, no hesitation, full-on desire. They wore each other out and fell asleep. When daylight came, they were together again, before, during, and after their shower. The party was on Friday night. Sunday afternoon, they came up for air and took a walk around campus. They talked again. Mike explained his majors, economics, finance, and computer science. Gina was impressed. She was pre-law. They both got all top grades. The walk ended with them sitting on a bench outside a student union, where they talked some more. Once a guy came up to Gina. He was a big black fellow, and he said, "Gina, are you free tonight? I have tickets to a Haydn concert." Gina smiled at the guy and said, "Sorry, Bobby, I have other plans." She and Bobby both glanced at Mike. Bobby looked quite disappointed, so much so that Mike made sure that his feet were firmly on the ground beneath him, in case he had to get up real fast. But Bobby walked off. Mike looked at Gina. "A friend of yours?" "Yes, Mike, I have quite a few guy friends. Bobby's a nice guy, and he really is into classical music. He also plays on the football team. But you turned him down. Don't you like Haydn?" "I like Haydn. I like Bobby. I like football players. But I like you more." There was a pause. "I can't believe I said that, but it's true." Mike was overcome with emotion. He said, "Not to move too fast, but you and I could be a thing." She smiled. "Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure we will." And they were a thing. A month after they met, Gina was living in Mike's apartment and never spent time at her dorm. They were a couple. So much were they a couple that when Mike went home for Christmas break, he did not visit any of his usual women, or any women at all, for intimacy. And although they had not discussed it, Gina was also abstinent during the holiday break. She was close to giving in one time after a night out with old friends, but she didn't. When she didn't give in to William Stokes III, a man with whom she had a long, intimate history, she had a realization. She was in love with Mike. However, she knew herself, and she was far from certain that she could be faithful and exclusive, even with Mike. She decided to see how it all went in the next semester, living with Mike and being in the direct way of all that temptation. It went well. Gina's former lovers on campus came to understand that she was now in a relationship. Most were okay with that. 2 weren't. But Mike discouraged those 2, in separate incidents, off campus. Gina herself was seldom tempted, since she couldn't get enough of Mike. The 2 did lots of things together. One thing they did was study at the apartment. Mike was interested in her law courses. Gina was interested in the computer material. So, they helped each other. Gina thought that Mike was the smartest person she'd ever met, including her genius father, who made all that money. Mike thought Gina was the smartest woman he'd ever met, with the possible exception of Rita Pilati. Mike understood that Rita was taken and off limits. But if she had been free, Mike would have been very interested, despite the age difference. He envied Paul. When summer came, they decided to stay on campus and take courses in order to graduate early. Gina had done that before and could be finished in December. Mike would need until June, but wouldn't have to lay on as much academic work during the regular year. Mike didn't have to go back to the neighborhood. Most of his business was done remotely, either by computer or phone. Once in a while he had to go meet someone back home. He took Gina with him in July for the 4th. There were always fireworks at the schoolyard, and he wanted Gina to meet his folks and his older friends. Gina was apprehensive. She was a trust fund baby and had not spent time anywhere that was as real as Mike's neighborhood. But she fit right in. Mike's parents loved her. The four of them had a nice dinner on the 3rd. She and Mike openly shared a bed at the house. On the 4th, Mike took Gina to see the Pilates and Tomas. Thomas left his 4th wife at home to cook. The 5 of them ate lunch and talked. Mike made it clear that Gina was very important to him. Gina, braced by her good experience with Mike's folks, was outgoing and attractive. After the lunch, Tomas, Paul, and Mike went for a walk around the area. They wanted a small business talk. Gina stayed with Rita. Gina really liked Rita, and Rita reciprocated. There came a time when Rita asked Gina, "What are your intentions toward my young friend?" Gina was at first taken aback, but she understood that Rita and Paul looked on Mike as a sort of son. She said, "I'm all the way in love with him, Rita. It's been that way since I first danced with him. I want to marry him and have his kids." Rita smiled. "You're a very intelligent girl, Gina. He's a gem. If I wasn't with Paul—" Gina had seen that already. She smiled right back at Rita. Rita said, "Gina, you're a very attractive woman. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience. I wonder if you can give that up." I wondered that as well. Mike isn't my usual type, big and built. That's why we're together now. To see. So far, I have had absolutely no inclination to stray. I believe I can be faithful. I will. Rita nodded. She said, "And it helps that Mikey is so very good at intimacy. I know. I've heard." Gina said, "It sure does help. I wouldn't have it any other way." Then the guys came back inside. Mike and Gina went with his folks to the fireworks, and then to the local social club. There was food and drink and dancing. Gina was popular as a dance partner. Mike didn't mind, except that Tomas took some liberties during a slow dance. Gina whispered in his ear, and he desisted. After they got back to his folks' house, Gina said, "Tomas is a hound. You should have warned me. I didn't think he'd— Well, it was good the way you handled it. What did you say?" "That I loved you and would always be faithful to you, even when I was dancing with the hottest guy in the room." Mike looked at her. He smiled. "You're quite the package." She laughed. Speaking of quite the package, Thomas had that. Mike said, "So I heard from his 3rd wife." "Why would she tell you that?" Gina said it with a mock cross look. "We were in bed at the time, with his permission. She told me he was bigger, but I was better." Mike smiled again. Maybe she lied, though. Gina was having fun teasing him. I should check it out, perhaps. After all, turnabout is fair play. "You don't have my permission." He was done with her. "I'm not done with you." He lunged at her and tossed her onto the bed. He didn't care that his folks might hear. Neither did she. She knew that Thomas would age out before she was tired of Mike. The two were married a week after they graduated, at age 22. The wedding was a blast. It was in a country club outside of Philadelphia. It was a golfing wedding weekend. Even Paul and Rita played that day. Not well, though, but they had fun. The idea came from Mike. He had met Gina's family. Her dad was initially reserved when they first met, but Mike spent the weekend with all of them and concentrated on Phil, her dad. He had convinced her mother, Colleen, almost as soon as they met. Colleen was a very sensual woman, as mentioned. Gina had to warn her off Mike, eventually. She let the flirting go on for a bit, though. She could see that both Mike and her mother enjoyed it. Phil, maybe not so much. Mike and Phil took a walk after the golf, the day before the wedding. Phil asked Mike about his prospects. Mike said, "Mr. Caldwell, I can take care of your daughter. I made money while I was in school. I'm going to pay for her law school. I have a financial consultancy business, and I'm good at it. Anyway, I signed the prenup. I'm not after her for her money. Far from it." Phil said, "Call me Phil. I asked before. I insist. I worry about— You made so much money at a young age. Is it legal?" Mike said, "Yes. That was the truth, more or less, so far as anyone could prove anyway." Then Phil said, Okay, one more thing. You're a lousy golfer. You need some practice." Mike laughed. He said, "When I do spend time on something, I usually get good at it. I'll play you around this time next year." Phil was surprised. He said, "Deal," and off they went. The honeymoon in Bermuda was great, and when the year was up, Mike and Phil played a full 18 to a flat-footed tie. They didn't play an extra hole. The bet was a push. Mike put Gina through law school, and she was pregnant when she graduated. She passed the bar and worked for a while at a firm doing real estate settlements. Easy work for a mother. She got pregnant again. They had a son, Timothy. Now, a daughter, Ella. Mike was in a position to work from home, so he could let Gina go back to work. She got a position with her current firm, worked her way up, and was now a partner. She was one of 4 and the newest. But she had great court presence, and her share was equal to the others because they needed her. But she didn't need the money, only the validation. Mike was very rich by the time Gina braced him about her date. So were all his clients. Paul was gone, a heart attack at 70. Rita still lived in their row house. Thomas was still going strong, on his 5th wife, who had lasted way longer than the rest. But now, Gina had flipped out at age 47. Both her children were out of college and doing well. Mike was relaxed and happy until she shook him to his core. Mike had noticed Bradley Dubois at the law firm holiday party. Gina had mentioned that she was working with him. She put no special emphasis on it. Her work hours increased, but that was because of the tort case, she said. In part, though, it was due to long lunches. Nothing intimate happened until Bradley confessed his feelings, or lust, for Gina. Then they hugged and had a kiss, outside the car in a park. But Gina broke it off. She was attracted to Brad, but she was not about to be unfaithful to Mike. Mike and her family were her life. Brad was a diversion, an attractive nuisance, like they taught in law school, an inviting swimming hole with hidden rocks. She knew that she had to consider the entire situation. Meanwhile, Mike was uneasy. He had seen Gina and Brad at the holiday dance. Brad's wife had seen the same. They were at the same table, watching their spouses dance. Mike said, "Blanche, do you guys—" She was a very attractive woman, a redhead with a full figure, in a great blue dress. Blanche said, "Are we in an open arrangement? No way. I can see some problems that I hope won't develop." Mike replied, "Me too. I'll keep an eye out. You as well." "Okay, deal." She looked at him more closely. She was impressed. She said, "That's a nice suit. You look very good in it. How long have you two been married?" 24 years about. You? 6. 2 children. I don't want any problems. You talk to her, and I'll talk to him. Just then, the music stopped, and the 2 lawyers returned to the table. Brad was a bright guy, but was unaware of the undertone of the continued conversation at the table. Gina was not. She and Mike went to the dance floor when the music took up again. He smoothly moved her away from their table. She said, "Nothing to worry about, Mike, okay? If you say so. Blanche is worried, though." The guy is very attractive, but I have you and I wouldn't trade. You should let her know that. Ease her mind, because I do have to work with him. I'll do what I can. Perhaps you could speak to Brad. I'll ask Blanche to dance." When the music paused, Mike and Gina went back to the table. Blanche and Brad were having a lively conversation, which stopped when the others walked up. The music started, and Mike held out his hand to Blanche while looking at Brad. Brad nodded, and out onto the floor they went. They had a nice fast dance, and got into it a bit. Blanche was a good dancer. Better than what Mike saw from Brad, who just clutched. When the music switched to a slow one, Mike smoothly pulled Blanche to himself, and they immediately swirled around slowly. She put her head on his shoulder. She whispered, "Maybe he'll think twice." Mike said, "Maybe I will too." She laughed. She said, "I see how much you love that woman. It's heartwarming." They walked back to the table, where they interrupted a discussion between the other 2. When the evening ended, Mike opened the cab door for Gina and waved to Brad and Blanche. Gina said, "Do you think she married him in part because of his name?" Mike laughed. "They are from Minnesota, not Tennessee." Gina said, "That would be New Orleans. I apologize for the dance, but you gave it right back to me. Not you, babe. I trust you. To him." She smiled. She thought to herself, He's so nice, but I need to keep myself in check. When they were home, Mike decided to be proactive. As Gina dropped her dress onto the floor, he made his move. He was very strong, and he lifted her into the air and whirled her around before depositing her onto the bed. He was on her and had her undergarments off in a trice. She was laughing and squirming, making a half-hearted try to get away. But she failed, much to her benefit, and his. There was a storm first, and then a small lull was followed by a steady stream of high-level pleasure for both of them. After, Gina was thinking about how great intimacy between them had always been, and she also had thoughts about Brad. She felt a little guilty about it, but it was only after they were finished when she began to wonder how long it would take Brad to make her come as hard as she just had. There was the fleeting feeling that she'd like to find out. Mike said idly, "I know you have some randy thoughts about that guy, and I know he has the same for you. Are you safe?" Gina didn't lie. Fudged is how she'd have put it. She said, "He's young, big, and quite attractive, but I'm fully aware of all that, and I won't allow any playtime, at all. Okay, just remember your promises, Gina." "I will." Yet the long lunches began in February. The declaration of lust was in April. Mike was aware of all of this. Unbeknownst to Gina or anyone else at the firm, one of her partners, George Bivens, had been a long-time client of Mike. And so, Mike asked him to keep an eye out, and he agreed. Neither of the men wanted the business relationship to become public knowledge, though. Their communications were done by burner phone. Mike had also spoken to Rita and Thomas, along with one of their younger associates. A youngster was sent out to get 3 cheap phones from the convenience store. They set up a code. It was a numeric scale, representing the amount of physical damage to be inflicted. Thomas's associate had several youngsters with bicycles keep a watch on Bradley Dubois and record his habits. The kids watched before and especially after school. An older guy took the lunch shift. Mike knew that Gina was falling into temptation. He was aware of the kiss, and he was aware that that was the only intimate contact between the two. The kiss was 3 weeks before Gina's declaration. She had decided that she couldn't cheat on Mike, but she had also decided that she deserved some time alone with Bradley. A new experience. A different one, too, after all these years. She didn't believe that Brad could give her the great intimacy she had with Mike, but she wanted to have another, younger man, for a while. Not so long. So, she came up with the open marriage idea. It wasn't ideal. She had often worried about Mike's feelings for his attractive secretary, Ellen Grove. She saw a chance that, given the hall pass, Mike might get in far deeper than she felt comfortable with. Ellen was divorced, 38, with 2 kids in school. She had worked at Mike's office for 8 years, and it was obvious to Gina that Ellen wanted Mike and vice versa. But Gina knew that Mike wouldn't stray. He was a man who kept his word, and he had made her a promise. Still, the temptation of Ellen was the one way Gina thought that she might get Mike's agreement. What a fool she'd been. His stoicism in the face of her proposal showed her how far from the truth she'd been. She had no idea what Mike was thinking, or what he would do. She was unwilling to simply put the plan aside. Now that it was in the open, she intended to push the matter. Except, she might lose Mike. She might have already lost him. She heard the front door close, and his truck start. She cried herself to sleep. Mike went to his office, where he had a cot. He watched an early-season baseball game and fell asleep. Too many swings for the fence, not enough stolen bases or hit-and-run plays. When Gina woke in the morning, there was no Mike next to her. No Mike in the house. No Mike expected back any time soon, if at all. It was Tuesday. She got up and discovered that he had taken his razor and toothbrush, his jeans and shirts, his running gear. He must have been expecting something, because he hadn't had time to pack up before he left after her speech. She thought about things, and realized that this last insight was the first systematic thought in her head, about this problem at least, for some time. Yet, she had always been a systematic thinker, almost like a chess player. What had happened to her? She decided to do an analysis of the situation, as if she were prepping a case for court, just to see if she could again become herself. Analyze backward from what she knew. Put yourself in the opponent's place to see what he, yes, he, might have seen and reacted to. Finally, what choices would the opponent have made, and why? And what choices could she make? Mike was cold, and exhibited no emotion in a situation where he should have been shocked and either angry or very sad, or both. So, he had had time to ponder the situation. He had known something, at least about her fooling around with Brad. How had he known, she thought? The holiday party, and his interaction with Blanche. From that time, he must have been on alert. She knew him. If he was worried about Brad, he would have taken some action. What would he have done? At that point, he couldn't have been sure that she would fall to Brad. In fact, he probably thought she'd get over it without him having to do much. But he would keep an eye on the situation. How? His neighborhood buddies. They had a lot of resources. That meant that he probably knew about the lunches and even the kiss. Still, that was a long way from what she had actually done to him. He could not possibly have anticipated her speech, because all she had done was some lunches and one not very intimate kiss. What else would he do? Oh, shoot, he'd have something ready for Brad. Or maybe not. Maybe he had considered that if she strayed, he would just leave her. She rejected this. If it were true, all was lost in terms of her marriage. So she had to act as if Mike wanted to save the marriage. One way to do that would be threats. He could just say that he would tell Blanche and ruin Brad's family. Or he could threaten divorce. She saw that both of those apparent solutions were not really solutions. In each instance, if successful, he would have secured her continued fidelity via a threat. He wouldn't see that as a way to have a satisfactory relationship with her. He had decided that all he could do was watch the situation and do nothing. Maybe if she and Brad had headed for a hotel, he had someone to stop it. Maybe someone to serve her divorce papers right there. She concluded that even when he was surprised by her jump to a proposed open marriage or a date with intimacy at the end, he could only watch and see what she did. She knew he wouldn't beg. No begging, no threats. That left what he did. Nothing. But geez, his version of nothing was icy cold indifference. It left her floating on a sea of uncertainty. She called in sick for work that day. She moped around the house and cleaned everything. A calming task. Mike didn't show. She left a message on his cell asking him to come home and they'd talk. No response. But Wednesday she dressed for work and went in. A chipper Brad met her at her office door. She ushered him in. She was late. It was already 10 a.m. When the door closed, he went to hug her, and she pushed him away. He said, "What? Do we have a date or not?" She said, "Yes, so far, but I told my husband that we were going out, and we'd have intimacy." He colored up. Christ, he'll tell my wife. I'm in trouble." She actually laughed at him. "Not yet." She paused. "I couldn't just lie to him, Brad. I love him. I offered him a hall pass, an open marriage. He's over half in love with his secretary. I thought he'd maybe go for it. Did he? What did he say?" "Nothing. He said and did nothing. He was completely impassive. I ran up to the bedroom. I was so frustrated. I expected a reaction. Later he left. It seems to me that he had stuff already packed. Maybe he went to spend time with the secretary." "No, he already had a plan, but he couldn't have known that I'd tell him I was going on a date." Brad was not stupid, but also not as bright as Gina or Mike. He at least knew his limitations. He said, "What do we do?" "Nothing for now. I still want you. I'll see about the date. Maybe we can still go. Please, Gina. I don't want Blanche to divorce me. She'll do it if she—" "Nah, you have young kids. She'll forgive, in time. We just monitored the situation. They did their work. But Brad was antsy. So was Gina, but she was better at hiding it." Gina was alone again Wednesday night. She called her dad and explained. They had a long talk, during which he upbraided her in very unflattering terms. At the end he said, "That man loves you, Gina, and you used to love him. Maybe you still do. You'll have to let him know that." Thursday at work, Gina and Brad decided to cancel. Gina said she'd go see Mike if she could find him. She said that if he was with his secretary, she'd be with Brad until the sun shone. Thursday night Gina went to the country club, where Mike always played pinochle in the evening. She got there at 8, just as the game was to begin. Sure enough, there he was. He looked at her with the same impassive face as before. The other players watched this. Gina said, "Mike, could I have a word?" Mike walked past her, outside to a patio. He turned to look at her, lifted a brow. She said, "I called it off. I'm sorry, Mike. I finally thought in an intelligent way about the situation from your perspective. I put you in a bind. I see that how you reacted means that you still want to be married to me. The old me, at least." "Is the old you still around?" "Yes, yes." She started sobbing and ran to him. He held her, patted her on the back. She cried. She said, "I'm so sorry. I went nuts. I'm so sorry." He held her tighter. They skipped the card game and went home. They went directly to the bedroom and did their level best to put the entire matter behind them. On the way home, Mike considered what to do about the message 6. He decided that Gina needed all his stock of forgiveness. Brad was a softball player. It was the spring season. He had a mixed league on Tuesdays that Blanche played in. He had an upper-level men's league game, double headers, on Thursdays. He was the captain and coach of that team. He was responsible for collecting the weekly money because it was pay to play. When the games were over, he had to stay and turn out the lights on the field. He had the key to the light box. He did that same routine that night. He made his way back to his van after the lights went out. No one else remained in the parking lot. 2 masked figures dressed in dark clothing with hoods up were waiting for him at his truck. One stepped out behind him as he went to stow the equipment bag. That person used a sap on Brad. Brad went down, but not out. He was stunned. He felt hands taking his cash envelope. Then he felt the kicking start. Ribs, rear, private areas, then a few to the face. Not a word was spoken. It ended just as fast as it started. He was in tremendous pain. He lay there, groaning for some time. Then he was able to get to the rear of the van. He sat on the truck, taking stock. He was missing a tooth, and his scrotum hurt terribly. His ribs seemed to be displaced somehow. He looked for his phone. Gone. His wallet. Gone. He found the truck keys and managed to drive himself to the emergency room. He staggered inside, and they took one look and rushed him onto a gurney and into a treatment room, where they injected him with something. They got his name and home phone from him before he passed out. The next morning, he woke up in a room. He had a drip for the pain meds. Blanche was there, along with 2 police. He made a report. They wrote it up as an ordinary mugging, money and wallet stolen. They found his phone at the field. In the end, he spent 2 days in the hospital and 3 more at a rehab place. He got home, still taking pain medication. Brad gave some thought to what had happened to him. He didn't believe that his attackers were after the money. He believed they wanted to hurt him, and had succeeded. A lesson learned, he thought. He couldn't be sure of his conclusion, but either way, he was done fooling around. Payback or karma, no matter. Gina heard about the mugging that Friday morning when she went to work. She was appalled. She had a fleeting thought that, even if she had not canceled, the date would never have happened. That caused her to consider a possibility. But no, she knew that Mike would never do such a thing, didn't she? He had been with her anyway. That evening, as they were eating burgers, Gina told Mike about the mugging. She had word that Brad would survive, with no permanent damage likely. Mike seemed ambivalent about it, but after dinner he pulled a get-well card out of their common desk. He wrote out, "Hope you recover quickly." He signed it, Mike and Gina. His writing. The 2 of them walked to the box at the end of the street and dropped it in. As far as he was concerned,